Hey there, it is Saturday, so it's movie night, and I'm here to present another quarantine quadruple feature for your viewing pleasure. My name is Paul, and this is my video for week 37. We just had Thanksgiving, so if you are one of the many Americans who sacrificed going to visit your family for the good of the country, thank you, I appreciate that. If you're one of the people who took a flight, like about a million other people, to go back home and visit some of your family, I hope that everyone in your family is okay and that no sickness was spread through your need to go visit your people. The days before Thanksgiving were the highest travel days since coronavirus has hit the US. And once again, kind of Americans are just proving that they're not really willing to sacrifice things in their own lives for widespread safety. So in the next few weeks, obviously, we're going to have really massive spikes in the confirmed cases of coronavirus, and I'm sure it's going to be even worse in Christmas. But LA is heading toward a second mandatory lockdown. I think that goes into effect right after this weekend. So I guess I'll just kind of keep doing these videos. And not going to see family isn't the only sacrifice people are making. For example, one of my favorite holiday traditions is watching videos of people getting trampled at Black Friday sales, and I don't get those this year, but you know, it's for the good of the country. I'm sure we'll have really disgusting videos of people fighting over TVs and toys next year. This week, we are going to be taking a look at sort of a Thanksgiving-themed quadruple feature. I know a lot of people did miss going to their families, but right after such a major election, that might be sort of a blessing in disguise. If you have any conservative family members that you don't want to have discussions about the election being stolen with or QAnon conspiracy theories, you might have dodged the bullet on a potentially very awkward family dinner. So I have got you covered if you want to get that awkwardness back in your life, and we're going to be looking at some of the worst dinner gatherings in cinematic history. I'm going to call this week Damned Dinner, just so you can kind of get that awkward energy back into your life. So, of course, as always, we've got 4 movies. Let's dive right in. This is a movie from 2015, and I absolutely adored it. Karen Kusama's The Invitation. This was a sort of horror thriller that was in and out of theaters relatively quickly, but I would highly encourage you to go check this out. It's about a guy and a girl that are heading to a dinner with a handful of friends. One of them has dated one of these people in the past, and they think that they now belong to a cult. So there's a lot of questioning what's going on in the movie. Is it actually cult-like activity? Do they want to try to kill them? Are there malicious intents to inviting them to this dinner? Or is it just a dinner party? And a lot of that is in the main protagonist's head, and we're kind of in the same mind space as him, not really knowing where the story's going. But The Invitation really goes for it in a very satisfying way. They stick the landing. The whole movie is great. Highly recommend The Invitation, 2015, Karen Kusama. All right, movie number 2. I absolutely adore The Celebration by Thomas Vinterberg. Thomas Vinterberg, as well as fellow Danish filmmaker Lars van Trier, created a movie doctrine back in 1995 called the Dogma 95 Manifesto. They both created a series of rules to make films by. And the point of the Dogma 95 Manifesto was to put the power of filmmaking back into the hands of artists, to sort of take it away from these big Hollywood movie machines that are filled with special effects and explosions and guns and things like that. They wanted to make movies more about the storytelling and the craft of filmmaking as opposed to technology. So some of the rules in the Dogma 95 Manifesto are: it has to be handheld camera. It has to be in color. No music, unless it's music that's occurring in the scene, unless it's diegetic music. No additional lighting. If a scene is too dark, you can clip one lamp on your camera, and that's it. You have to film in an actual location, no sets. If there's a specific prop that you need for your movie, you have to find a location where that prop would be found. No sound that's not recorded in the scene. So you're not going to have voiceovers. You're not going to have times where you go and fix the sound in post-production. So they had all of these rules in order to make it more about the story, to kind of get away from all of the traps that we think we need to fall into for filmmaking. We have to have the nicest cameras. We have to have the best locations. We have to have props and costumes and set decoration. They kind of scrapped all of that. So there's all of these rules to kind of make filmmaking more accessible for anyone. There wound up being about 35 Dogma 95 films that adhered to those rules. And most of the movies don't stick 100% to the rules. Like Thomas Vinterberg admitted in The Celebration, there was a scene where he covered up a window with a sheet so that there wasn't quite as much light as he wanted, which you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to alter the light at all. You're supposed to just use natural light or the light fixtures that happen to be there. But he kind of fudged it a little bit. The second Dogma 95 film was Lars van Trier's The Idiots, and there's a scene where he has some music in the scene, like kind of over the scene. It clearly wasn't there. So they break the rules a little bit, but really the idea of Dogma 95 is just to kind of get you back into the mindset of storytelling and filmmaking. Dogma 95 was very influenced by the French New Wave, which we'll talk about in detail on another day, and it would go on to influence mumblecore, which we talked about a number of weeks ago in the thrillers of the 1990s, which I think was week 9, but I can't be sure. The Celebration is so timely. This is a movie that is perfect for the Me Too times that we find ourselves in. It's about a family that gathers for their father's 60th birthday, and it's a grand party where a lot of people are invited to all pay tribute to the patriarch of this family. But one of the 4 children has recently died, and they just had the funeral right like days before this movie happened, and the child that died was a woman that was a set of twins with a man who's coming to the party as well, one of the sons of the guy who's having his 60th birthday. And he has different plans for his party. He's supposed to be giving a speech, and I won't go into too much detail, but he drops a bombshell at the party. And this movie, the people at the party are really just a grand representation of America dealing with bad news, trying to pretend like nothing is happening, trying to pretend like they're not hearing it. Like the first people who stepped forward, well, for decades, women that were stepping forward and men that were stepping forward, you know, with their stories of rape or sexual abuse or assault. It was very common for people to not believe them because it was awkward and it was uncomfortable, and people don't want to have those conversations, or they don't want to admit certain things about people that they might be friends with. And of course, Me Too really blew up Hollywood, but really the whole country with starting to believe victims with their stories. As difficult as that might be, as much as that might shake things up, it's better in the long run to make it a safer industry and a safer world for everyone that's in it. But Me Too, The Celebration really tackles a lot of those topics, and it shows just how unwilling the awkward, horrible truth can be for people to accept, to the point of ignoring it, to the point of trying to shut it up, to the point of trying to get it out of the house. It's very uncomfortable. It is one of the most awkward dinner parties you are ever going to watch, but it is a tremendous film. And the filmmaking aesthetic is so interesting with the Dogma 95 aesthetic. It's filmed on, a digital camera. It's very, very low budget looking, and the aesthetic really gives it like a home video feel. Like it almost feels like there's people there recording, which makes the whole thing more intimate and way more awkward, as if you're just watching home videos from the night of this celebration. The other thing that this type of filmmaking enables the filmmakers to do is to be more creative. The camera angles, because they don't have extensive lighting or sound setups, they don't have crew walking around behind them as they're moving their camera, they can put the camera wherever they want. It's just one person with a camera. They can angle it up at extreme angles. They can follow people. They can do tracking shots. no tripods is one of the rules of Dogma 95, so they have to do tracking shots and follow people. But they can really move the camera in crazy ways that you don't typically see in more of a standard Hollywood production. So it was really inspiring a lot of creativity with the filmmaking as well. But The Celebration, if you can get past the kind of do-it-yourself, low-budget aesthetic, I think is a very rewarding film. This is the first official Dogma 95 film, and it was the best of the whole bunch. Check out The Celebration, one of the most awkward dinner parties that you'll ever be privy to. Movie number 3, one of my all-time favorites, and involves maybe the worst dinner table scene in cinematic history, the masterpiece from Tobe Hooper, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's about a 5 to 10 minute dinner table scene in the final act of the film where the movie just reaches peak insanity. Watching it, it's the closest anyone has ever come to putting a nightmare on celluloid. We've talked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre a few times, and it has a very like cinema verite, natural filming style, almost like documentary news footage. So when this came out in 1974, it was very gritty and real, and there hadn't been a lot of films that were made in this style. I think it's a masterpiece. I think Leatherface is an amazing character, and I think his whole family that populates the movie is dark and twisted and disturbing. And Sally Hardesty, played by Marilyn Burns, who passed away a few years ago, is one of the ultimate final girls. She runs and screams like a champ. Gunnar Hansen, who we also lost a few years ago, plays Leatherface. He was actually a poet and like a man of words, but he does such a great job of playing the very disturbed. It is just a horror masterpiece, one of the 3 greatest horror films ever made, and one of my top 10 films of all time. Absolutely love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Okay, movie number 4 that we're gonna wrap our quadruple feature up with, 4 damned dinner parties that you do not want to be at, is Robert Altman's Gosford Park. Gosford Park is a really fascinating look at like posh British culture in the 1930s for wealthy elites that pretty much depended on their servants. So there's essentially 2 storylines going on with the upstairs people, who are like the elites, the wealthy people having a dinner party over the weekend, and the downstairs people, who are all the maids and butlers that are helping keep everything afloat. And it seems like there's like twice as many servants as there are people that are being served. But the movie is a really great commentary on the haves and have-nots. And the way that they're all portrayed in the movie, even though the upstairs people are usually portrayed a little more callous than the downstairs people, Robert Altman really treats all of them as very, very human people. And that's the fascinating thing about watching this film, is there's like 30, 35 characters, like leads in the film, and it follows all of them pretty effortlessly and pretty seamlessly. If you're familiar with Robert Altman, he also made big ensemble pieces like Shortcuts and Nashville. So you would think, oh yeah, doing a movie with Robert Altman, doing like a big ensemble cast, that's a no-brainer. Any producers are going to want to do that. But he hadn't been very successful in the 90s up to that point. He'd had a few bombs. He was really old as far as filmmakers go, so studios weren't putting a lot of money on him. He's also an American filmmaker, so to really take on all of the customs of like a posh, wealthy British culture in the 1930s he wasn't really the first choice for something like that. But it was a concept that he developed with actor Bob Balaban. They hired a writer who would go on to win Best Original Screenplay, and they wanted to do sort of like a murder mystery, like an Agatha Christie type murder mystery film. But they couldn't really find any Agatha Christie stories that they wanted to do, so they just kind of created the story whole cloth out of the writer's imagination. And in typical Robert Altman fashion, it's all about the characters and their relationships with each other. The murder is very much a secondary aspect of this story. It's not really about the murder at all. It's not really about why someone murdered. It's all about these characters and their relationships and the history and customs that we're witnessing. So the murder doesn't even happen until well over an hour into the film, once they've kind of laid the groundwork for who all of these people are. And it's a really unpleasant dinner that they're at. It seems like none of the elites really like each other very much, but it has some of the biggest British actors in the world. It has an all-star cast: Helen Mirren, Maggie Smith, Michael Gambon, a ton of others. Just a really stellar cast of tons and tons of people. And one of the cool things Robert Altman does for filming is he mics up everybody. So if there's like 15 people in a scene kind of coming in and out and passing each other, all of them have mics on. He also has 2 cameras floating around any given scene. So you never know when you're in close-up as one of the actors in the scenes. You never know if your dialogue's going to be used. So anytime they have a scene, it's sort of like a big sequence where everyone has to be on their A game. You kind of have to be in it the whole time. Very much like a play. Watching his movies is sort of like a big choreographed play. Gosford Park was released in 2001, and it went to the 2002 Academy Awards. And the movie was doing really well. Everyone really loved Gosford Park. It was a hit. It got really great reviews. And then it started getting nominated for Academy Awards. Best Screenplay, Best Picture, and Best Director, which were great for Robert Altman, a real comeback for his career. And quite honestly, this is the type of film that the Academy just eats up. A movie about a different culture that's highbrow and classy and sophisticated. This is definitely the type of film to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards. It's also really good. Usually that stuff is kind of fluff, but Robert Altman, I think, shot himself in the foot that year, because 2001 obviously was the year that the terrorist attacks happened on the World Trade Center, 9/11, and Robert Altman publicly made some pretty stupid comments. He said that it was Hollywood's fault because movies have gotten so big and violent that nobody would ever imagine a terrorist attack the size of September 11th if they hadn't been inspired by Hollywood films. I mean, it's a pretty stupid take. I sort of get where he's going, that movies were getting like too big and ridiculous, but giving terrorists ideas on what to do, I don't know, that's a little silly to me, and it was a little silly to a lot of people who were really offended, who work in the industry. And I honestly think that cost him a Best Director Academy Award, and I think it knocked this out of the running for Best Picture as well, because it didn't win either of those. Instead, what won was the very average A Beautiful Mind, and Ron Howard won Best Director for A Beautiful Mind, which is crazy, because while A Beautiful Mind is definitely the type of sort of elevated fluff that the Academy eats up, Ron Howard winning Best Director against Robert Altman is crazy. But also that year, the nominees were Ron Howard, who won Best Director, Robert Altman for Gosford Park, Ridley Scott for Black Hawk Down, Peter Jackson for The Fellowship of the Ring, David Lynch for Mulholland Drive. The idea of Ron Howard winning over any of those 4, to me, is absolutely asinine, but I mean, that's the way it goes for the Academy Awards. But Gosford Park it's a lot of fun. British comedy of manners about the upper class and the servants who wait on them hand and foot. And it's a really empathetic view of the servants. And the amount of research that they did on the movie, the amount of detail for the period piece is really extraordinary. It's a very impressive film. It's also very, very entertaining murder mystery, even though it's much more about all the relationships. A couple other disastrous dinner films that I really enjoy. Knives Out, but I don't need to talk about that too much. It was a hit last year, but a great murder mystery about a family that gathers for the reading of a will. And one that I think is pretty good, but I didn't like it quite as much as the rest of the world, You're Next. I think it's a pretty solid home invasion thriller, horror comedy. I'm not a big fan of home invasion films. I don't typically like them. And I think this one has a bit of a cop-out with the final girl, making her sort of such a fucking ultimate badass that you're never really too worried for the final girl. There's so much self-awareness with final girls, especially with Carol J. Clover's Men, Women, and Chainsaws, like sort of a feminist text analyzing slasher films, which coined the term final girl. So many filmmakers and horror fans are now aware of the gender studies that have happened with slasher movies, that filmmakers are trying to sort of subvert expectations or trying to really lean into them by really focusing on the final girl and making her like a badass action hero. But that's not really what made Final Girls interesting. What made them interesting was that they were just a normal person who happened to be very smart and resourceful, using that intelligence and resourcefulness to their advantage to be the one to survive when everyone else is kind of fucking around and having sex with each other and doing drugs. The resourceful final girl is the one who's kind of like focused with her head in the game. But like having a final girl that's sort of just like programmed to have her head in the game, to be like a badass, feels like a cop-out to me. But it's still a pretty fun movie that people like. But a good Thanksgiving thriller as well as You're Next. So those are the 4 movies that we're going to be watching for damned dinner, to get your fix of awkward family dinners that you might not have gotten this year. We're going to start with Karen Kusama's The Invitation, Thomas Vinterberg's Dogma 95 film The Celebration, Tobe Hooper's horror masterpiece The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with one of cinema's worst dinner sequences of all time. And we're going to wrap it up with Robert Altman's classy comedy of manners, Gosford Park. Those are the 4 movies that we are watching for damned dinner. I hope whatever you were doing, you had a great Thanksgiving. I hope you're continuing to be safe, because this pandemic is getting worse and worse. So social distance, wash your hands, wear a mask, be safe, watch great movies. Thanks for watching. See you next week.